Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here and to be a part of the Girl Up family. It's been a really empowering journey with Girl Up, and I'm so excited to be here with Laverne today.
And I'm excited to be with you here today, Dani. Thank you so much for all the work you do. And thank you, Girl Up. I'm can't wait to get started.
Yeah. So, Laverne, you are someone I've looked up to for a really long time. I watched your documentary for school actually this year. I wrote my senior essays on it. And I think the first question I have for you really is, what motivates you to do the work that you're doing to bring trans voices to the forefront and to make sure that the image we see of trans voices on screen are representations that are full and true to life?
Thank you for that question. When I think about what motivates me and keeps me going, even when it's very difficult, and there's lots of pushback, is a deep love for trans people. Knowing trans people personally, having had relationships with trans people who've changed my life, understanding the deep humanity that we bring to the world and the amazing contribution that we've made throughout history to the world, and how often that has been silenced, has been disappeared, how our humanity continues to be discounted. I've been so blessed to have a platform through my work as an actor. And so I feel like my job really is to elevate the beautiful humanity of trans people. And that comes out of a deep love for trans people, and also understanding the political realities of what we're seeing as what I would call a backlash against our unprecedented visibility that we're experiencing for trans folks globally right now. So it all starts with love for me. And it starts from seeing that there is a need, and that there has been a lot of misinformation about trans people, a lot of dehumanization of trans people in media, in public policy, et cetera, and wanting to write that record and write us into history, in ways that we've always been in history, but really, acknowledging that. And it comes out of love.
Absolutely.
So for you, you're an activist advocating for the elimination of gender-based violence and against climate change. What has motivated you to take to the streets to protest about these issues?
I think really similar to you. It's that I have been so fortunate to have a platform through Girl Up, to have learned these amazing skills. And I think just seeing so many young survivors of sexual violence be so disenfranchised by the systems, often not reporting, and then when they do report, nothing really happens. And I think knowing that the government by itself isn't going to deliver the change we need to see, it's really inspired me as a survivor and as a young person to use the opportunities and the resources that are around me to protest these issues and make sure that we see that change. And the reality is that climate change and gender-based violence and so many of these issues intersect and intertwine, and they're so deep rooted. And I guess the reality is that I'm not going to bring about that change by myself, but I like to know that I'm doing the best that I can, and to know that that changed world is there for someone.
Activism these days seems to start younger and younger across a wide range of issues. What stands out to you about Girl Up as a movement, and what do you think makes it special?
I think what's really great about Girl Up, and as you were saying really, is that it's girls from across the world, from all walks of life. And what's really empowering about it is that because we're so young, we have so many different experiences, but it also gives people the opportunity to be involved in that activism regardless of whatever professional experiences really they have, because often it seems like there's almost a barrier of entry to be an activist, to be an advocate, even though there shouldn't be. And so, what really makes Girl Up special to me and to a lot of other people is that it's accessible and that it's empowering. It means that we get to see young people just like us from backgrounds so diverse, but more often than not, in many ways reflecting our own, actually do amazing things and create change. Because the reality is, most of the leaders we see in places where they're making these big decisions, they don't look like us as young people. They don't look like us as survivors or as people of color. And that's what makes Girl Up as a movement so special. And that's what makes you so amazing and powerful as a leader as well. That's why you're so inspiring and so incredible, because you're able to be so outspoken and you're able to give us someone to look up to, and for so long we haven't had that. So I think that's what really makes these movements really powerful and really special.
I love that. I love what you just said there, because I think that a lot of times people feel like they want to do something, they want to get involved, they don't know how to get started, they don't know how to access resources to make a difference. And you and Girl Up are giving us, ways and to overcome those barriers of entry to create change. And I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, and that barrier is a massive thing that face advocates and activists no matter what stage they're really at. So as someone who has really fought for and brought about tangible change and inspiring change, what advice would you have for young advocates like me who sometimes feel like they're not making progress or their work isn't leading to those changes that they really want to see?
I mean, there's so much progress that I want to see happen that hasn't happened yet. And it gets very frustrating, particularly here in my country, here in the States, with what's happening legislatively for trans folks. I mean, on any number of issues. I think when you think about the material conditions of real people's lives, it's probably always going to be frustrating. But I think sometimes we have to focus on the little victories that we can make, and when we have those little things, that we celebrate them and understand that it's a marathon, not a sprint sometimes. And sometimes it's just about my dear friend Chase Stranger, who works for the ACLU, there was a bill passed in Arkansas that would strip gender affirming healthcare from trans youth in the state of Arkansas. And that bill was, the governor vetoed the bill. That veto was overridden, and it was supposed to go into law in July. And the ACLU went to court and blocked it. It's being appealed. So the struggle continues. But the fact that they were able to block that bill, and for now, kids in the state of Arkansas are able to access gender affirming care is a wonderful thing. And so it's a small victory, but we have to celebrate that for now, even as we understand the fight continues. So when we have small victories, it's important to celebrate those things. It's important to always foreground the people who are most at risk and most marginalized. So I think that it's going to be frustrating. It's going to be hard, but when there are small victories, celebrate them and understand that there's always going to be work to do. And if we continue to do it with love of people I think what stuck out to me during the pandemic is like a lot of my activism was alone, sort of via Zoom, and because there was a pandemic, and there's something so empowering about doing this work with community. And sometimes just the piece of coming together with like-minded people who share your values, and you're coming together to fight, sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it's enough just to be in community with other people who have a love for justice, and just the gathering together can give you strength, and feeling the collective power that you share can be something that you can hold on to, something that can fortify you. So it's really about looking for those little things in the fight that connect us, those little things that we can celebrate and to keep us moving forward.
Absolutely. And I love that idea of celebrating one another and celebrating those little victories and moments you have together. Because I suppose even beyond activism, that's what creates communities. That's how you make changes at any level, and that's how you really make families and communities and bring about that sort of joy. I think that in a lot of ways we sort of see those communities in terms of activism intertwining and intersecting. And so at all these points, you have a lot of things to learn and relearn. And even as you make change and you have those joys and those victories, you also find things that you need to relearn and learn along the way. And so on a slightly different question, I think another one question that I wanted to ask you was that I personally have been involved, often secretly, in a lot of queer activism in my school community, and recently they've tried to put in a bill that bans us from teaching about trans kids in schools. But I often find that a lot of the people around me don't really understand the idea of gender as self-defined rather than related to like biology. So I guess my question would be, how would you sort of describe those concepts to someone who isn't familiar to it necessarily? Because I know that's something I really struggle with.
It's really interesting because there's just so much pushback. I just did a podcast about sort of right-wing propaganda here in the United States, specifically around trans issues, and how so much of that propaganda sort of focuses on science and biology. And it's really important to note historically how science and biology have been used and weaponized against marginalized people, right? We don't want to be in denial of science, particularly as we have a global pandemic, but we also have to understand underlying motivations for that. I think, one thing I would say to people is that for decades, sociologists have acknowledged that there is a sex that is assigned at birth to people based on, and that sex that we assign at birth is really based on external genitalia. That is that's what happens. But we know scientifically even that our gender is so much more than, or even our biological sex, and I say that term in quotes, is so much more than our external genitalia, right? And that we sociologists have acknowledged for decades that gender is something that is cultural, and it is different in different cultures, right? That folks who identify as female or as women in Muslim countries are going to express their gender very differently than folks who identify as female or as women in the United States, for example, right? So that gender is, Judith Butler would say it's a performance, but I would say it's an expression of gender roles that varies from culture to culture. There's something that is socially constructed. And I think when we reduce, I'm an intersectional feminist who is anti-essentialist, right? And I think a lot of the conversations that are anti-trans want to reduce people's gender to biology and reproduction. And that is, if you are an anti-essentialist, intersectional feminist, we understand historically that it is deeply problematic to reduce particularly women to biology and reproduction, right? That has been a way to oppress women historically. And so that gender is about so much more than that. So I think that most of the time when people are walking down the street, when people are applying for a job or need to access public accommodations, we don't know what their chromosomes are. We don't know what their external genitalia is because people wear clothes. So there's so much that we don't know about people's biology, but then there are ways that people may present themselves. They may express their gender, and those things may be clothing or mannerisms or any number of things, and people's pronouns are different. So biology as a way that we interact socially is not really useful, right? If we're talking about reproduction, if we're talking about healthcare, sure. But in terms of our social interactions, in terms of how we need to interact with people and access public space or accommodations, chromosomes are irrelevant, external genitalia is irrelevant, whether we have reproductive capacity, all of that is actually irrelevant. And it's really about how we express our gender. that is important in those interpersonal spaces. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that. And for people who want to reduce folks to a sex that we're assigned at birth based on external genitalia or chromosomes, that is actually not really practical in terms of how we are interacting in the world and need to access care. Because for me, at the end of the day, I mean, access care, access public accommodation, and really not experience discrimination, not experience violence. That has very little to do with someone's chromosomes, external genitalia, secondary sex characteristics. Yes, these are things that we can sort of possibly interact with. So I think those are the kinds of conversations I would invite when we have conversations about sort of gender identity versus biological sex. And another thing I want to say, at least in a legal way, my friend Chase, who works at the ACLU, I often allude to, has said for years that there's no such thing as biological sex. And what he means by that, because he's a lawyer, is that in the United States, the term biological sex as a matter of law was not used until 2016. And it was used as a matter of law in 2016 as a way to discriminate against trans people in the HB2, aka the bathroom bill in North Carolina. So until 2016, biological sex as a matter of law was not a term that was used until it was introduced to discriminate against trans people specifically. That historically in the law in the United States, gender and gender stereotypes and sex stereotypes were used interchangeably as a matter of law and precedent in the United States.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing. I'm from a culture where we only have gender neutral pronouns in our language, and before colonization, we had a lot of genders that weren't just sex. We had a lot of queerness in our culture, and I think it's a massive shame that so much of that has been lost to colonial understandings of gender and sex. But I'm really, really fortunate and grateful that we're getting a lot of that back now, in a sense, and that a lot more people are pushing to oppose those bills that harm so many queer young people and queer people across the world.
Now, Dani, we talked about activism and what it takes to make lasting change in our world. What is sometimes overlooked is the mental toll on activists, especially when these issues are so deeply personal. How do you balance self-care, activism, school? I can't even imagine, and everything else you have going on in your life. You're 17 years old. And I'm 49. So and I still have trouble balancing it. How do you do it? How do you do it, Dani?
I mean, I think the reality is sometimes I don't. Like, sometimes you just can't and you drop the ball here and there. But I guess what balance means isn't necessarily keeping on top of everything at once. It's recognizing that a lot of things just aren't as important as a lot of things make it out to be. And I think it's recognizing that you're allowed to put yourself first and drop the ball sometimes. And the reality is that if you're happy with yourself, then it doesn't matter so much what other people think about what you're doing. And I think the other main thing is to lean on the community around you. And often that means teaching other people how to do the things you can do. So it's not just the skill you have, it's not just the platform you have, it's allowing other people to share that work with you. And so in doing that, you're sort of taking that pressure off yourself, but you're also empowering someone else to do that work and to make that change that's often just as important to them as it is to you. So I guess the main things are sort of, not everything's as important as it seems, and sometimes you can just give up a little bit. And then also just lean on the people around you, because they're going to be able to help you, and they're going to be able to help the causes that you care about as well. That's so important, and it's not talked about enough really. But I guess just reminding yourself that there are people around you and the world's not going to fall if you're not holding it up. And I think with activism, because you are doing so much, it feels like you always need to be doing something, because it often feels like you always need to be pushing for that change you want to see. Otherwise it's like, well, then what's going to happen? And yeah, so I'm really grateful that you've brought that up and spoken about that, and just for all the work you've done. It's been really, really inspiring. So yeah, I just want to thank you for this conversation, and it's been really amazing.
Thank you. I want to thank you as well. And I want to thank you for the work. And for me, young people like you are truly what gives me a lot of hope. It's hard to have hope right now with so much of, particularly in the United States, with how our politicians and our politics are so deadlocked and so divisive. And when I see young people having the courage to tell the truth, having the courage to march, to protest, to stand up, it gives me so much hope, and it helps me to carry on in this work when I want to give up hope. So I wanted to be here today to say thank you and to send you a lot of encouragement, and let you know that you inspire me, and young people like you deeply inspire me to keep going on and doing this work. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And that means so much, because I know I look up to you so much, and people like you, and you are the reason why we feel that we can do this work. It's because you've let us stand on your shoulders. So yeah, I'm really grateful for you and for the activist community for letting us create these changes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think last thing I'll say is I think one of the most doing the work, yes, and creating change, but then creating spaces for other people to have a voice and to know that they can lift their voices, that they can speak out and be in the truth is a huge part of the work, giving space to other people to know that they can. And I know that you're doing that as well. And that is a huge part of this work. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.